Proposed law in Connecticut would limit landlords to a 2.5% yearly rent increase and prohibit them from ending a tenancy at the end of the lease period. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News.
So the issues that I see right now with being a landlord anywhere in the world, but that are particularly difficult in the West, are, number one, you are restricted in many cases of how you can run the property. And so a lot of cities have banned Airbnb. Yields are low, inflation is high, and they're tying your hands again behind your back and saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, minimum 30-day stays. You know, if you want to do Airbnb to increase yields, all kinds of restrictions, or in many cases, simply banning it outright in cities from Berlin to who knows where. Other rental rules, what can you do? What kind of people can you lease to? Do you have to accept, just anybody? Do you have to accept, certain government subsidized folks? Can you get rid of someone if you just want to move back into your own house? Evictions, another issue. How long does it take to evict people? I remember talking to a guy in Montreal a couple years ago. He said it's impossible. People, some people will just come and rent your place, and they'll just last as long as they can. Eventually, you'll get rid of them. They'll just go do it somewhere else. They'll basically never pay for rent. That is an issue now where, because yes, some landlords at one point screwed tenants over, every landlord has to suffer with these crazy rules when people game the system.
All right, so I have an interesting topic for you today, and it's going over this law in Connecticut that's been proposed where basically landlords would be stuck under a rent control system of 2.5% annual rent increases. Now, I've talked a lot on this channel about rent control, and specifically about the rent control that's in place in St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, the reason that the rent control in St. Paul is so bad is because it limits landlords to a 3% rent increase regardless of inflation, regardless of any other factors. And that it's a crap law. It makes no sense, and it's going to cost landlords a ton of money. And you know what the response from landlords and real estate developers were? They backed out. They backed out of the city. They pulled their money out. They said, we're not investing here, and you know what, screw this, we're going home, okay? So yeah, it makes no sense that Connecticut would want to implement something similar for their entire state, especially considering the fact that, hey, there are other ways to get more affordable housing out there, specifically cutting back on the laws, rules, and regulations that make housing so expensive. Okay, that is the real problem right there. Not that landlords are raising the rents too much. It's that there isn't enough housing for the demand, okay? There aren't enough new housing units being built. And if they worked on that, the real true root cause of the problem, instead of blaming landlords and then trying to basically destroy our businesses, well, then maybe they'd find a solution. But that's not all, okay? The very same proposal also wants to put extreme limits on who landlords can evict. They want to say, hey, no, you have to only be able to evict for these very, very specific causes. So what this does is it destroys our leases, okay? They call good cause eviction, because they only allow certain reasons for landlords to end a tenancy. But one of those reasons is not that the period of the lease is over. So if you put a tenant into your unit, right, and you say, okay, I want the tenant only to live in there for 1 year, and then after that year, I want to be able to move back into my house, and you can't do that. Not anymore. Not with this good cause eviction law. Now you're stuck letting the tenant stay for as long as they want to stay. Not for anything to do with you as the landlord wants, okay? It's your property, but guess what? Your property rights have been stripped away and given to this tenant who now has, not only no way to be evicted, but now has permanent rent control, helping them to pay low rents forever. Okay, so yeah, Connecticut's trying to screw over landlords. Not a surprise, not a surprise. I tell you, there's a reason why I don't invest in certain areas, right? And I already know that, when you're on the East Coast in these very, very far left-leaning progressive areas, well, you're going to have a lot less property rights. It's going to be more difficult for you as a landlord. And my suggestion is to look elsewhere, okay? So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think, okay? What do you think of this proposal up in Connecticut talking about rent control and good cause eviction laws, okay? Do you think that this is going to be a good thing that will actually help the affordable housing issue within the state? Or do you think this is an absolute disaster that not only will exacerbate and make worse the affordable housing issue, but will also punish good landlords and make us fall into financial ruin? Okay, and you know just by my response right there what I think. So leave your comment down below. Let me know what you think. Anyway, let's get into this article. This article is coming from therealdeal.com, and it says, Connecticut proposal would cap annual rent increases at 2.5%. Measure introduced by State Senator Gary Winfield would also eliminate no-cause evictions. Yeah, double whammy. It's a double whammy type bill. And this is the kind of thing that they're proposing all over the country. The truth of the matter is, right, they want rent control everywhere, and they want no-cause eviction laws, or good cause eviction laws everywhere. They want to extend the eviction moratorium forever, and they want to take away landlords' ability to raise the rent for any reason. Because this is a push towards socialized housing. They think the government should own the housing and that somehow this is going to end up being a better system, when the truth of the matter is it won't work, and it will end up with people living in worse housing, worse conditions than they did before. So anyway, let's get into the article and see what it says. A Connecticut state senator has submitted a bill before the legislature that would cap yearly rent increases at 2.5%. and eliminate no-cause evictions, Connecticut Insider reported. The bill, introduced by Senator Gary Winfield, Democrat from New Haven, would cap increases between landlords and tenants, as well as agreements between tenants. Owner-occupied properties with 1 to 4 units would be excluded. So they always throw that in there. Oh, owner-occupied properties with 1 to 4 units, right? Well, the problem is that the grand majority of rentals out there are not owner occupied, okay? Now, I can be an individual small landlord who, a house that I used to live in myself, right? Rather than selling it, I just turned it into a rental. So I have one non-owner occupied property, right? And it will fall under this 2.5% rent increase law, okay? So what that means is, let's say your rent is $1,000 per month. What is 2.5% of $1,000 a month? It is $25. So here we had 8% inflation in the last year, but you're only able to raise your rent by 2.5%. So right now is the case study of why this law won't work. Meanwhile, your insurance has gone up, your property taxes have gone up, your utility bills have gone up, your maintenance costs, every time you need something repaired, those costs have increased. If you need, to pay for any capital expenditures, like if you need a new roof put onto your house, or if you need a new furnace, those costs, the cost of the labor and the cost of the materials themselves, have increased. Okay? All of that is very, very true. Not only that, but if you have a mortgage on your property and you were forced to refinance, right, you're going to be paying a lot more for that mortgage because interest rates have gone up as well. So, yeah, this is putting landlords in a very, very bad situation where our costs, they might have increased far more than the 8% general inflation rate, okay? Remember, the 8% is a general inflation rate. Some things within that general rate have increased higher than other things. So if you as a landlord aren't able to individually decide, what your expenses are and how much you need to increase your rents, then you just can't do business in a way where the government is making that sort of decision for you. Okay, it just does not work. They don't know your expenses. They have no clue if your costs have gone up at all this year. They're just making a rough estimate based on, magic, because there's no way you can figure out how much any individual landlord's costs have gone up. My costs might have gone up less than the landlord down the street. That's because every little factor for a landlord is individual. It isn't something that can be figured out with a calculator. That's why my rent goes up in one manner and another landlord's rents go up in another manner. But regardless of how much I or another landlord or anyone else wants to increase our rents, we can't just raise them exponentially. Okay, we are still limited by the market. The market overall is what decides how much rent we can charge. So if the market says, hey, the most that anyone in this town is willing to pay for rent is $1,000 a month, well, I could put my rent at $1,500 and nobody's going to buy it. Okay, nobody's going to pay that much because there's a whole ton of other places where they can get for $1,000, and that's the limit. That is the limit. The market should be the limit. Okay, that is the reality of the way things work. That isn't what these tenants think is the reality, but that is the truth. State law only provides good cause eviction protections, preventing no fault of retaliatory evictions following tenant complaints about maintenance to people over the age of 62 and those living with disabilities, the outlet reported. The law prevents landlords from issuing no-fault evictions or retaliatory evictions following a tenant's complaints about maintenance issues. Tenant advocacy groups are supporting the measure in light of rents soaring an average of 20% in the last 2 years, according to CT Insider. So yeah, if rents went up 20% in the last 2 years, right, that's only 10% per year. Okay, so if the rent was $1,000, 1 year it went up to $1,100, right? And then the next year it went up to $1,210. Okay, that's really not that much considering. Now, if you cap it at 2.5%, if the rent is $1,000, the first year it'll only be able to go up to $1,025. And the second year, just barely anything more than that, maybe a little over $1,050. So basically, the landlords would be crippled. They would be crippled to the point where many would go into bankruptcy, or, and this is what you'll see in like big cities like New York. You'll see huge maintenance issues going on with buildings and with apartments and houses, etc. Because landlords realize, well, I can't afford to do all of these repairs and fix this place up because I will never be able to cover the cost of doing those things with increase in rents. So what you end up with is a whole bunch of dilapidated, buildings that basically everything's falling apart. And that's not what I want to see. That's the reason I'm so against a lot of this rent control. So you can read more about this proposal in the article. I'll put a link to that article in the description below. But, this is once again another, just jump straight into the absolute worst possibility for, making housing less affordable and for hurting landlords.